Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. So we're going to spend some time now talking about the function of behavior. And when we think about that, the function of behavior, another way of putting that is we're trying to look at answering the question why. Like there's stuff that somebody does, and we can think about what it looks like, or we can think about whether it's problematic, or we can think about a whole bunch of different questions. But probably the most important question for us to think about when we're trying to decide what we do about something is figuring out why somebody's doing the stuff that they're doing. Okay. And when we think about that question, why, we're not really thinking about super big picture things or things that took place like a long time ago. Like in traditional psychology, we might look at things that happened to somebody years ago and think about that as the why somebody's doing what they're doing. We're not really thinking about that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff certainly does play a role, and there are pieces of it that we may want to consider sometimes. But for our purposes, we're not talking about the distant why. We're talking about the immediate why. And one way of thinking about that is thinking about, there's this word context, right? It's basically, you can think about it as what's happening around it. In what background is it happening, right? So we've got this behavior, but it's not just happening by itself in a vacuum with nothing around it, right? It's couched by environmental events, by this context. And when we think about function, we're looking for that context. And really that context, we can talk about what envelops that behavior as this stuff over here that happens before the behavior happens, right? And then the behavior happens, and then there's all this other stuff that happens over here after the behavior happens. And that's really the context that we're talking about. We're talking about the antecedents, which is the stuff that happens before, then we've got the behavior, and then we're talking about the consequences, the stuff that happens after, okay? And really when we're trying to think about function of behavior, we're looking a little bit at the behavior itself, but we're looking a lot more at the context. We're looking at what happened before it, and we're looking at what happens after it to try to understand why someone might be engaging in that behavior. Now, it's worth noting that when we say behavior, we're not just talking about quote unquote naughty behavior, right? We're not just talking about behavior that needs changing. We're talking about anything that somebody does, right? We don't do things just because. We do things for a reason. Things that work out well for us long-term, things that don't work out so well for us long-term. We're doing them for a reason. And that reason is the difference between what was happening before we engaged in the behavior and what happens after, okay? So this goes for our students, but it goes for us too, right? And it goes for behaviors that we'd rather not see, behaviors that don't work out well, but it also goes for behaviors that work out great. Everything happens for a reason. So our goal is to try to figure out that context. And we use that context to basically put behavior into at least one of 4 different categories. Sometimes it can be more than one, but for our purposes, to keep it simple, looking for one of these 4 categories. Why do people do the things they do, okay? And those 4 categories are, people can do the things they do for attention. They can do the things they do to escape or avoid a situation they don't want to be in, right? And when we think about the difference between that, they escape, they get out of a situation that they're in that they're not happy that they're in, or avoid, they do it to never even get into that situation in the first place. So we've got attention, escape, avoidance, tangibles, which is a fancy word for stuff, right? People engage in behavior to get stuff, get things that they want, okay? So we've got attention, escape, avoidance, tangibles, and the last one is sensory stimulation. Sometimes people do stuff just because it feels good to do it, right? They like the way that it feels, they like the way that it smells, or it tastes, or just the effect that it has on them. Aside from anything that changes in the environment, right? Aside from anyone else doing anything. So sometimes when people are just sort of like doing stuff and you're like, wow, why are they doing that? Seems like no one's having any reaction to that. Maybe they're doing it just because it feels good to do it, right? So we've got attention, escape avoidance, tangibles, and sensory stimulation. So those are the 4 categories of function, the 4 possible functions, why somebody does the stuff that they do, okay? So our goal with this piece of the assignment, you're doing your ABC analysis, taking a look at the stuff before the behavior itself, and then the stuff after the behavior, is to try to do a little detective work and to try to figure out, based on what I saw, why is this problem behavior happening? Is it happening to get attention? Is it happening to get escape? Is it happening to get tangibles? Or is it happening for the sensory stimulation that it provides? Okay? And the way we can do that is by thinking about that context, those antecedents and consequences. One way you can think about it is, what wasn't happening in the environment or wasn't happening that much before the behavior that now is happening way more after the behavior happened, right? And you can almost think about it like flipping a switch, right? If we think about, why do we flip a light switch like this, right? Well, we probably do it like that because it was dark in a room, we flip the switch, and the light goes on, okay, right? We did it because it takes us from a state of darkness to a state of light, right? So we can think about that with any kind of behavior, right? And any kind of ABC analysis that we're doing. What wasn't there or wasn't there that much before the behavior, and then the behavior happened, and now there's more of it happening now. That's going to give us a pretty good clue about function. Now, I say a pretty good clue because all we're doing is coming up with a hypothesis. We're coming up with a hypothesis. For those of you that are into science, it's an educated guess. We're coming up with our best guess based on the context in which behavior is occurring, why we think someone's engaging in that behavior. So again, to sum up, our goal here, we're doing our ABC analysis, looking at the antecedents and the consequences of behavior to come up with a reasonable hypothesis. Is this behavior happening to get attention, to escape or avoid a situation, to get access to tangibles, or for sensory stimulation? So that's your challenge here, is to take a look at that ABC and try to figure out what's the function. Basically trying to answer the question of why. What's this person getting from doing this? Why do we think they're doing it? Because the answer to that question is going to be the primary driver of what we decide to do about it. I look forward to seeing what you all come up with.